Good evening, my name is Joanna Johnston and I'm the Collections Officer for the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. I'm going to speak this evening for approximately 30 minutes on the Arts Council's collection, providing a brief history of its past and highlighting some works of interest selected along a particular theme. The Arts Council holds nearly 700 works in its collection today, and it exists to support contemporary visual arts practice in Northern Ireland by purchasing from artists living and working in the country, to track new trends and developments in the visual arts, and serving as a type of permanent record of the arts for a particular period of time. Equally, it exists as a public permanent document and is there for the public to experience through a free public loan scheme, which means each year we can loan out as many works as possible for exhibitions in galleries, public venues, and in the last few years to local schools through our schools lending scheme. The Arts Council collection for Northern Ireland has a rich history and is one that has very much evolved over the 79 years it's been in existence, becoming increasingly diverse in its range of disciplines represented as the years progressed, and representative of a changing society in Northern Ireland. I am keen through this talk to give a sense of that change and looking at its very early beginnings as a group of paintings through times of conflict in Northern Ireland, which created an unusual and challenging environment for making and collecting art, and through to times of post-conflict and relative peace in the early 2000s, when the Arts Council collection operated under a new acquisition policy, which provided a new direction for its purchases. But to give a bit more of an understanding of the collection's history, we'll first touch on and go back a bit to the past to give some context to the works I will later focus on. The Arts Council's collection dates back to 1943 and was initiated by the predecessor to the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, which was called CIMA. And this stood for the Council for the Encouragement of Music and the Arts. And this was a type of public body that was set up in wartime Britain to promote the fine arts in times of little opportunity for artists. It has been noted one of the first actions of CIMA in Northern Ireland was to purchase paintings by local artists. And in this first slide, moving on, we can see two CIMA catalogues, exhibition catalogues, which now rest in the Northern Ireland Public Records Office and very much show the leaning at the time to paintings and sculptural works as a preference for collecting. One is from an exhibition of artists whose work was developed from CIMA travel bursaries, and the other of a CIMA loan exhibition of a well-known modernist, Irish modernist painter called Colin Middleton, which CIMA and later the Arts Council in Northern Ireland held many works by. By 1949, the collection comprised of 36 pictures, and even from these very early days, the collection was established as a public loan one, which by the mid-1950s were being displayed in a large number of public places. Back in these earlier days, as public interest in the arts grew, the Arts Council opened and ran its own gallery spaces in Belfast City Centre, which had a total of 3 in its time, the first opening in 1959. And these provided an opportunity in the early days to show works of mainly painters and sculptors who had received bursary support and in part this helped influence the growth of the collection. In 1962, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland was established as a successor to CIMA. And then by 1967, the collection had grown to 111 works, which very tragically, most were destroyed in an accidental fire in that year. This led to various new approaches of building the collection through the insurance money received, including the purchase of an up-and-coming Irish-born artist, Bridget Riley, who was an op artist and of which one painting and prints were purchased following the advice sought from an expert from London. And then this turned out to be a very sensible decision indeed. Another measure was the partnership purchase scheme, and this ran for 20 years and purchased artworks with the support of other public institutions who covered 50% of the cost of the work. And this was a scheme that had been run by the Arts Council of the Republic of Ireland, who had worked with hoteliers in purchasing works for their collection. By 1968, the Arts Council opened its longest running gallery space in Belfast city centre, and this was to be known as the Arts Council Gallery based in Bedford Street, which was the year before the violence broke out and the 30-year conflict, which became known as the Troubles, began then 1 year later in 1969. The venue was primarily a gallery space to show art, but it also functioned as a type of multi-art form centre where theatre tickets could be purchased, and workshop space was used by all sorts of musicians and artists. The gallery came to operate through a time of great political turmoil and social upheaval, and aimed to provide a presence for the arts in the city centre and grow audiences in which was a very perilous place to venture for the public, particularly throughout the 1970s when bombings were frequent. But in spite of the many obstacles the gallery faced, it helped to develop visual arts culture in Belfast over the years. And the gallery itself was bombed and rebuilt several times in the 1980s. Critically, it had an important role as a contemporary gallery network in the city centre that exists today, hadn't fully formed until the years following the peace process in the mid-1990s. And I've included in this next slide, moving on, in this next slide, an image to give a sense of what this gallery space looked like from 1978. It's an exhibition of performance art, which was part of a local festival, Belfast Festival at Queen's. And one of the invited artists was performance artist Kevin Atherton, who was up and coming at the time, having just shown in the Serpentine. Unfortunately, not many photographs exist of the Arts Council Gallery in its heyday, and I had to do quite a bit of digging just to get this one. And although we don't have all the information on this particular evening of performances, it does transport us back to that time as we see an audience engaging with what was at the time an emerging discipline. It was within this context of the ambitions of the Arts Council Gallery through its exhibition programme that new and increasingly more challenging acquisitions were being made for the collection that strayed into new discipline areas beyond painting and sculpture. Following a 30-year effort of rebuilding the collection, by 1999 it had grown to around 1,200 works. And at this point, the Arts Council did a review of its collecting policy, which considered a number of factors which made keeping a larger collection difficult, including the increasing cost of insurance and the conservation and storage issues it was posing. This led to a large majority of the collection being gifted to registered museums across Northern Ireland to allow for the best care and conservation of the works through their specialist staff and facilities, which the Arts Council was not set up to provide. By 2003, the Arts Council had created a new acquisitions policy and began purchasing works again, which met a new set of criteria, which still largely inform priorities for purchasing works for the collection to this day. And it is in this new period of collecting that I will focus on for this talk and highlight through 6 selected artworks how visual arts practice in Northern Ireland came to evolve within its context as a post-conflict society, and in particular works from photography and sculpture disciplines, which have embraced the possibilities of new technology. Just moving on then, this is my first artwork I've selected, and this goes back to the earlier days of when the Arts Council began purchasing work again in the 2000s, and comes from a Northern Ireland born photographer called Donovan Wiley, whose work is well known internationally through working with Magnum Photography, numerous published photography books, and major exhibitions in many of the world's photography galleries and museums. I've selected 3 photographs which we hold in the collection from a series called British Watchtowers, which was made in 2007, and we can see how they are to be shown together, providing a sightline of a view. In these works, we have a very direct confrontation with a post-conflict aspect of Northern Ireland's history, the process of demilitarisation, and how photography can be simultaneously used to document, to question, and suggest a different narrative. The series, which exists as both book and as exhibition prints, documents the watchtower structures which were built in the 1980s on the hilltops of South Armagh, which is a rural region of Northern Ireland. These structures were constructed for the purpose of surveillance of the local area by the British Army during the Troubles. And as part of the peace process for Northern Ireland, and as a starting point for this work, these structures were dismantled in the later years of demilitarisation, which the artist documented over a year period, mostly by helicopter, through working with the Ministry of Defence. To operate as surveillance structures, these towers contained high-tech cameras and listening devices, which allowed army officers to track civilian movement on both sides of the border with the Republic of Ireland. And this was chiefly as a way to gather information on paramilitary activity. The artist is interested in the position of command the towers and the hilltops in which they are situated provide. And this alludes to a system of Iron Age hill forts, which date back to 500 BC, and these were situated across the UK. We can see this clearly in the three works we hold in our collection from this series, which are presented as a triptych, providing from the tower's perspective a panoramic sightline of the rugged rural landscape that falls below. I'm just going to move into some of the detail of these works. This is the first photograph. The watchtower structure in the first photograph stands, as you can see, in isolation with its hilly terrain, and there is a strong sense of disconnect with its surroundings. And this is the second photograph. The towers heavily relied on the advancements in technology of the 1980s to serve their function, which is very interesting for the purpose of this talk, I find. And also interestingly, the artist has noted on the series, the camera surveillance technology was so advanced that it could read the speedometer on a car. Whilst this photographic series carries an overt political weight, it can also be viewed from a different perspective and within that of the context of new technologies, which these towers relied on to deliver their purpose. And that's just the last image we have. The towers provide what we could now consider as an intervention into a landscape that was otherwise very rural and typical of the countryside, and creating a version of it through camera technology, which now we would recognise as virtual reality. The artist's practice is interested in architecture of power, which this series and his other Northern Ireland-based work helped develop this focus, and has since expanded to other areas of conflict, including Afghanistan. And just interestingly to note, other works from this series were shown in a major exhibition in the Imperial War Museum. To move on then to my second artwork. And this is a piece called Yellow Helicopter by an artist called Brendan Jameson. And this has been one that has always been a very popular object for loan from our collection, and which still stands as a signature piece of sculpture in the artist's practice, created during the early 2000s. This was a transitional period for Northern Ireland following the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which brought a new wave of optimism amid the establishment of a power-sharing Northern Ireland government. The artist, who has since become well known in the years that followed for his playful use of unconventional sculptural materials, and which in recent years have included pioneering a technique through crafting with sugar cubes. And he's delivered this in some major site-specific sculptures in places worldwide, including the Pompidou Centre. So this was an early work for the artist, created not long after he completed his MFA at Belfast School of Art, that very much reflects a new sense of hope within Northern Ireland at the time, and which we can see both aesthetically through the vibrancy of its sunshine yellow and the levity of the wool material it has been crafted from. A key strand of the artist's practice is his play on objects and materials, which historically carry notions of gender. In this piece, the helicopter has been meticulously formed using hundreds of strands of yellow wool, with the resulting sculpture one that very much encourages the audience to interact and touch, asking us to experience the work using a different paradigm. The helicopter traditionally carries associations with the masculine gender through its role in military history, and the artist is drawing on that. And this creates an interesting contradiction through his choice of material, which is wool, which would more traditionally have female associations. Living throughout the Troubles in Belfast, helicopters were a ubiquitous presence in the skies, to the extent they even became the background noise of everyday life. This work for the artist revisits his early memories of growing up in Belfast at this time, and it is intended to be viewed carrying the weight of this association. But interestingly, by reframing through its materiality, he is able to transport us to the experience of the sublime and the imagined. It's a playful, fun object, and it's there for all audiences to enjoy, even particularly children. It is a sculpture with many layers, physically and conceptually, which speaks to more hopeful times, as it invites us to redefine our experiences and associations and to fully engage with its possibilities. This next work I've selected, it's from an artist called Susan McWilliam, and it straddles photography and installation through its use of stereoscopes in the presentation of the work within the gallery space. And I've included an image provided by the artist of the work being exhibited in Corner House Gallery in Manchester from 2001. Importantly, the purchase of this piece was in the first group of acquisitions in the early 2000s, paving the way for increased representation of female artists working with lens-based media in the years that followed. I've selected this piece to show the shifts in photographic practice taking place at the time, which was embracing more installation-based outcomes, and which we can see in this image. The work comprises of 3 stereoscopes that are wall-mounted, which would appear to blend into their environment. The stereoscope is a device which creates an illusion of depth, which creates an illusion of 3D depth through the use of 2 images of the same subject that are taken a short distance apart. And this is the equivalent to the distance between the left and the right eye. And when viewed through special lenses, the images are then overlapped by our brain. And each stereoscope that we can see in this image contains 2 35mm slide transparencies, which are illuminated from behind. And when viewed through special lenses, that illusion of depth is then recreated. It is via the intimacy of the stereoscope as a viewing device. The audience is invited to peep into the binoculars to spectate a view that would be initially unseen. And we can see then what we can see when we look through the binoculars. And this work was developed from an earlier series called Fint, and it was created by the artist during a residency at the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin. The artist revisits this idea in this work of witnessing a girl dressed in period costume before and after a state of collapse. But instead of the looped video image of the girl falling to the ground, which was in the earlier work, set against the backdrop of bird song, the same scene is presented via the stereoscopes. There is a sense of the fantastical and the unreal, reinforced through the dreamlike intensity of the colour of the girl's dress and the luscious foliage on which she is strewn. Through the use of the stereoscopes, the artist is experimenting with our perceptual awareness, by constructing how we experience this scene and the narrative it suggests. The female figure we see, which is performed by the artist herself, draws on the idea of spiritualism and materialization mediums through the performance aspects of the work. This series, coupled with the earlier video work, is significant to her practice, marking the beginning of an interest in extrasensory perception and psychic phenomena, which culminated then in 2009 when she represented Northern Ireland in the Venice Biennale with a video installation work called Flammarion, and which we also hold in our collection. Move on to my next work, and this is a piece called The Massacre of Definition by John Rainey. He is an early career artist who was born in Northern Ireland towards the latter half of the Troubles. And interestingly, his sculptural practice embraces the history of sculpture and fully engages with the possibilities of technology in creating a new sculptural language. He is an artist whose formal training comes from outside Northern Ireland, and he studied an MFA in ceramics and glass at Royal College of Art. And it was there at RCA he began to use digital technologies such as 3D scanning and printing through the dedicated facility there. And this led to the formation of an interdisciplinary approach, which we can see in the image of this work. This sculptural piece is part of a series called Insurgents, which came out of the artist's 2012 MFA show, and which comprised of a series of mutated bust-type sculptures sculpted using Parian porcelain with a futuristic aesthetic achieved through 3D printing technology. This meeting of traditional craft and new technology has informed the artist's practice in the 10 years following, as he explores the classical form within the context and possibilities of the digital world. The fragmented forms in this piece speak to the artist's interest in the different versions we create of ourselves online in our post-internet world. And within this piece, there is the sense of a world in collapse and information overload, and the multiple identities bred by our increasingly virtual environment, blurring the lines between truth and representation. Whilst it's not overt in the themes of his practice, the artist has acknowledged the influence of growing up in Northern Ireland and the disconnect he found between everyday life and the media representation of the country during times of conflict. He was born in Omagh, which is a rural town which was bombed in what became one of the worst atrocities of the Troubles in 1998. And his practice evolved within this context and continues to make reference to the idea of the relationship between mediated events and reality. In 2009, he went on to be awarded the British School of Rome Fellowship, which was where he researched the history and role of the copy in relation to Roman sculpture. It is this preoccupation with copies and with secondary things, with representation and reproduction, that are important aspects underpinning his practice thinking now. And the work that he developed in Rome has continued to shape his practice in the years since. Very interesting ways. So this next work I've selected, I've chosen the work of another early career artist called Robin Price, who came to study and live in Northern Ireland post-2010. And his work can be seen to represent further shifts in photographic practice, and which fully engages with the possibilities of new technology. I have selected one photographic work which is part of an extensive and ongoing documentary photography project, Era of the Anthropocene, first created in 2018. Within this series, he uses a custom-built LED light painter to create a visual image of particulate pollution levels, which translates into light dots through using long exposure photography. And we can see this in the image. And this has the effect of shedding light on different levels of pollution that would be invisible to the naked eye. The resulting images are both mesmerizing and shocking in their subject matter, highlighting important environmental concerns. This work is one of 10 from the series, which is held in the Arts Council's collection. And the work has been shot in different sites around the world, including India, Mexico, and Africa. And the artist is continuing to work on new sites as well. This is an ongoing project for him. But also of interest is the artist's background and how he came to an artistic practice through a less traditional route, having studied a master's in theoretical physics. Scientific know-how is the cornerstone behind the thinking and process within his practice, enabling him to adopt the possibilities of new technologies to experimental artistic outcomes. And his approach is playful and highly experimental, placing the process by which it is made on an equal footing with the artistic outcome. The work in this series it belongs to is a new type of documentary photography. It's one that is collaborative, transdisciplinary, and has an element of activism. It is work that will not rest contentedly on the gallery walls. It's helping drive forward changes in behaviour and a shift in thinking around global problems. And this has included of a number of things, an evaluation of low-cost air quality sensors and anti-pollution toolkits and protest cards. The work belongs, and this series belongs to a new era of practice, which I find so interesting for the purpose of this talk, where the artwork refuses to be solely observed and narrowly defined within one context. And this is my last work that I've selected. It's a new work from C Wright, who is an artist from Belfast, principally working in photography, and who is well known for making work that explores the Northern Ireland conflict, another politicised terrain worldwide, over the last 30 years of his practice. Having grown up in the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, his earlier work carries through it the siege mentality of growing up in Belfast and living in a divided community of North Belfast near the Shankill Road. As an early career artist, he sought to investigate and provide new representations of aspects of the conflict, which can be seen in key earlier series, including Sectarian Murder from the late 1980s, which paralleled the everyday with the brutality of the conflict in Northern Ireland. But this photograph that we see in this image, this is in the slide, this is a recent acquisition of the Arts Council's, purchased from the 2021 series titled Beasts of Burden. And this focuses on the notion of reconciliation in a post-conflict situation. And specifically, the artist is dealing with the Rwandan genocide of 1994. This was a genocide that was enacted by the Hutu power government and its officials, which encouraged ordinary citizens to take up arms against their Tutsi minority neighbours, murdering an estimated 1 million people in 100 days. The series is an extension of the artist's approach to photography, which captures through non-dramatic images the conflicted history of a place. Within this work, we are given insight as viewers into a unique reconciliation project called Cows for Peace, in which the artist took part in the workshops, forming the research stages behind the work. The project pairs together a survivor and perpetrator of the genocide, engaging them in workshops focused on truth-telling and acceptance. And as part of this process, they are given shared ownership of a donated cow to embed truth and forgiveness in their community, as they raise the cow together to help heal the wounds of the past and build a sustainable future. I have selected one of two photographs that we had recently purchased from this series, and this is a portrait shot of one of the calves raised in the duration of this project. Interestingly, the artist shot the series in the fashion of portrait photography using lights and screens. And this provided a controlled environment to make the work, creating distance from the everyday environment and allowing for quiet reflection of the subject matter. Whilst the cows in this series are presented as metaphors for peace and forgiveness, Their history as animals associated with slaughter makes them very poignant reminders of the victims of the genocide, and marked by details which we can see in this image, such as the tethered neck and the hint of bloodshot in the stare of the eye. The series offers us fresh insight through its approach to its subject matter, how artistic practice can help represent and deal with the atrocities of the past and be used as part of the process for reconciliation. Selecting this work to conclude with feels an appropriate place to end and to mark journey through the collection in nearly 20 years now of new acquisitions, which began with works more rooted in Northern Ireland's political past to a recent acquisition that takes us to a completely different part of the world, but while still dealing with the trauma of conflict in a different way. The works I have included in this selection have also aimed to highlight the world of rapid technological development that came with the new millennium and the broader perspectives to visual arts this brought. I've concentrated on those works which have evaded narrow definitions and that speak to other contexts and whose subject matter travels beyond Northern Ireland's borders. And I hope along the way, I've captured some of the complex and interesting history of this public collection as one that has survived in the face of much adversity. Thank you very much for joining me this evening and to Art UK for the opportunity to take part in this series. And if you'd like to see these works and other works from our collection, please take a look at our page on Art UK's website. Thank you.